So those of you who were here last week, followed along or were able to share last week, what were some of the things that we ended up talking about? Anybody remember?
Well,
Israel going to, Jacob moving to Egypt.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of where we ended, right? We
Yes.
ended with this final reunion where Joseph and his father Jacob, they finally get together and they meet together. And what was that experience like for both Joseph and Jacob? What was that like?
well, for Jacob, seeing his son had to be kind of a good reunion, I would think.
Yeah.
Thinking that he was been dead for several years here, and that alone would have to been a joy to him.
Absolutely. In fact, it talks about in the text, it talks about weeping and crying, and there's a great celebration, right? I mean, things are great. Things had been really bad for a long time. They had their highs and their lows, but Joseph is separated from his family. His family, they all think he's dead, and now there's this reunion. And a very similar thing happened when Joseph revealed himself to his brothers. You remember, Joseph's a very emotional man. I guess real men do cry because Joseph is crying. He's almost like the weeping prophet. He's almost like Jeremiah. You kind of read through and, his brothers come and he can hardly hold himself back. He has to excuse himself. He goes off and he has a moment of shedding tears and he composes himself, comes back out, and then he sees him again at another time and he's overwhelmed. And so Joseph is overwhelmed. And of course, the reality is that any of us would be overjoyed to see our family members and people that we hadn't seen in a long time, or people we thought were dead, and yet we've been reunited. You can think about, there was a movie years ago, I forget what it was called, just kind of comes to mind now thinking about this, that relayed the story of that big tsunami that happened and hit India and was it Southeast Asia and all of that. And there was this whole story, and I believe it was based on a true events where, family members were separated and they were trying to find one another, and, they're assuming that, the other is dead, but they're still looking, but they finally come together at the end. They find one another, and of course it's great joy and all of that. And, we've seen movies like that. We've heard of, maybe we've even experienced things like that. In a bad storm, something happens, and we think maybe the worst could have happened to our family members, our friends, and then later on, we're reunited. It's a great joy. So I think we can kind of understand what's going on with Jacob and with Joseph and that reunion that happens there. Now, I made the point that this reunion between the father Jacob and his son Joseph is symbolic of something else. What is it symbolic of? Don't be shy. Kimberly, what do you think the reuniting of Joseph with Jacob is symbolic of, especially in light of the fact that Jacob and the family assumed he was dead? Oh, I can't hear you.
Resurrection?
Yes, resurrection. Absolutely. Ding, ding, ding. Get a gold star. If you like gold stars. Otherwise, get a Snickers bar. I don't know.
Oh, I like a Snickers bar.
All right. I'm going to have to start giving out Snickers bars for people to come and join the class. No, it's absolutely right. Can you see that there, right? We might not see it at first, but this is very similar. We talked about this last week. It's very similar to what happens with Abraham. Abraham goes up on a mountain. He offers up his son Isaac. Now, he doesn't physically sacrifice his son, right? His son isn't physically dead, but the Hebrew writer will say, in a figurative way, in a metaphorical way, he does receive him back. It is a resurrection that happens. It's symbolic of resurrection. The same thing happens here. We've got the symbolic aspect of resurrection that's happening. And of course, this is pointing forward to Jesus' resurrection and to our resurrection eventually. So resurrection is a big point. It goes throughout the scriptures. Sometimes we miss it because we don't think through kind of what's going on. When somebody looks like they're dead. I'll give you another one. And this one might even be more obvious. You might have even seen this before. But, Daniel, and there's a whole study we could do about Daniel, but Daniel is betrayed by people, and he is thrown into the lion's den, right?
Yep.
Now, the assumption was you get thrown into the lion's den, what happens?
You die.
You die. And the text says a large stone. Anybody starting to get the imagery here? He goes down into death. A large stone is rolled over the face of that lion's den. And in the morning, bright and early in the morning, they remove the stone and Daniel comes out alive. That right there is a picture, again, of resurrection. It's a really clear picture pointing us forward to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. But just to make the point that there's a lot of passages in the Old Testament that do point us to the resurrection without actually saying, probably one of the most famous passages is in Ezekiel, the Valley of the Dry Bones. Everybody's heard of that. That
Yep.
is often looked at as a picture of resurrection as well. But again, there's others that are throughout the Old Testament. So it's littered all over the place. I point that out because, and I make a big deal of it because it's a big deal with the Bible, this concept of resurrection. So when Joseph and Jacob meet up together, it's my son was dead, but now he's alive concept. All right. Anybody else with anything else for review? Where we've been? Anything you want to say before we get into chapter 47 tonight?
Well, I have a question, and it probably goes way back, but I've missed somewhere. At the time that, I guess even at the time that Joseph was sold, was Rachel still living?
You know what? I would have to go back and look, but I believe she died. She died giving birth to, or right after the birth of Benjamin. It was right during that period of time. So no, he sold off into Egyptian slavery. I believe, I'd have to look, but I believe she's dead.
Because I know she hadn't been mentioned in a really long time. So.
Yeah, she dies, and I'm pretty sure she dies before he goes into Egyptian captivity. But that's just going off the top of my head recollection. I'd have to actually go back and look and see. Part of the problem with some of the chronology in Genesis is they do a lot of backtracking. So I'll give you an example of this. Obviously, it's God through Moses, but Genesis chapter 1 tells us the 7 days of creation, right? The 6 days of creation, and then God rests on the seventh day. But when it goes into chapter 2, of course, the first couple verses are really connected to chapter 1. But it goes into chapter 2, and it almost sounds like a separate creation account. It's not. What's happening is the author, Moses, inspired by God, is going back to day 6. and is zooming in on it. So sometimes what happens in the book of Genesis is you will get this big sweeping narrative, this big story about what's happened, what's going to happen, and then you'll go back in time and the story will be examined deeper, closer. So you got to be careful. Sometimes the chronology is not exactly this happened, then that happened, then this happened, then that happened. Sometimes it's A happened, then B happened, then C happened. Oh, let's go back and talk about B in more detail. Does that make sense?
Right.
Okay, so like I said, I'm going to go out on a limb. I believe she is passed on before he goes into slavery. But yeah, she hasn't been mentioned in a long time. But again, that would be something to confirm. But go ahead.
She died before Joseph even had his dreams.
Okay, yeah, I thought it was pretty far back.
Hey, how come your picture's not up?
My picture's not up because I'm ugly.
No. Who was it just talking there?
Well, that
That's
was Paul.
I don't have a camera on my computer.
Oh. Well, it still works, doesn't it?
Yeah, the audio works, yeah.
Okay.
All right. Anything else? Okay. Let me get somebody who would like to read. We're gonna start in chapter 47. We're going to be looking at verses 1 through 12 to begin. So 47, 1 through 12. Who wants to read?
I'll get it.
You'll get it? All right, sounds
Yeah.
good.
Well, you just took it off. Oh, so Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, his father and his brothers, with their flocks and their herds and all that they possessed, have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen. And from among his brothers, he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, what is your occupation? And they said unto Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were. They said to Pharaoh, we have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for our servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. And now please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen. And if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. Then Joseph brought in Jacob his father and stood him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Jacob, how many are the days of the years of your life? And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, the days of the years of my sojourn are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Then Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their dependents.
All right, very good. Thank you. All right, so what does Joseph do in the opening verses here in 47?
He told the Pharaoh and his family that basically had come to Egypt there.
Yeah, right. He visits with Pharaoh, and he kind of lets him know the family's there. And what does he do? Verse 2. Who's he bring with him?
Says
5 of his brothers.
Yeah, he's bringing 5 brothers. He's bringing some representatives of his family to go in. Now we don't know who they are. They're not mentioned which 5. But he brings 5 of his brothers in, and they're going in. So once they talk with Pharaoh, and he gives them permission to stay in the land of Goshen, what does Pharaoh say to Joseph specifically?
Are you talking about putting some of them to work?
Well, yeah. Well, he says in verse 6, right?
Yeah.
Settle your father and your brothers, right? The best land. And then he says, right, if there's any
Put them
able
in
men
charge of
among
my
them.
livestock.
Yeah. So what's he doing there? If there's any family among you who are shepherds, let them take care of it. He's what's going on here? Why is this happening?
Well, Pharaoh evidently wants Joseph to stay.
Right, that's a big part of it, isn't it?
I would think so.
He thinks very highly of Joseph.
Yeah, he definitely thinks highly of Joseph. And what has Pharaoh experienced as Joseph has been in his life?
Good.
Yeah, all kinds of good, right? Not
Yeah.
only did you remember early on, he gets the favorable interpretation of the dream. Nobody else could tell him what his dreams meant. Not only that, he gives him good advice. And then when Pharaoh puts him in charge of everything, he puts him in charge, and he's second in command. What happens under Joseph's command, under his management?
He prospers.
Yeah, he prospers, absolutely. So Potiphar recognized that Joseph was a good luck charm, right? Something special about him. Everything is prospering, right? When Joseph was in Potiphar's household as a slave, he saw everything is prospering. When Joseph went to prison, what did the prison warden, what did he see in Joseph?
He's so good, and put him to work. Put him in charge.
Yeah, saw good, put him to work, was blessed. He was his lucky charm, right? And so the same thing's happening here with Pharaoh. Pharaoh is it's very likely that Pharaoh wants to keep Joseph happy. I think he respects him. I think there's some respect there, and all, but he also doesn't want to lose him, right? Which is probably part of the reason why he tells Joseph, tell your family to come down here to Egypt, right? I think he wants to honor Joseph with that, but there also may be a little bit of, well, let's make sure that Joseph doesn't leave. I'm going to make things comfortable here. Bring his whole family down. We'll take care of everybody, and my good luck charm will not leave. I mean, if there was someone like Joseph in your life, you owned a business or something, and you recognized before he came along, well, yeah, you might, things might have been good, but whoa, this guy comes along and everything is going great. Everything's prospering. You're making money hand over fist and all that. Might you want to keep hold of that guy? Might you want to, maybe give him a couple extra vacation days or something like that? Wouldn't you treat that person well?
Is there anything I could do to make him happy?
Right. Yeah, of course. We all would do that. So Pharaoh's not doing anything different. And so clearly that's part of it, right? Pharaoh wants to keep Joseph and his family happy, and Joseph is Pharaoh's good luck charm. But there's something else going on here as well, right? Does somebody have something to say?
No, go ahead.
So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, if Joseph hadn't been there to interpret those dreams, Egypt would have been in the same situation that Jacob was with the 7. They had the good years, and then they had the bad years. And had they not saved, that Joseph hadn't realized what was happening in those dreams, they probably would be starving right now also.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Absolutely. So Joseph is definitely someone you want to have around. Yeah, Egypt would be in the same situation. I mean, you and I both know, everybody knows that, I mean, they might have put away some food for a rainy day or something like that, they probably would have had some storehouses and stuff, but very
Not
unlikely.
7 years.
Yeah, very unlikely that they would have stored up enough for what was going to happen for those 7 years of really hard famine. So you're absolutely right, Bill. Now there's something bigger going on here as well for why Jacob and Joseph and the whole family is down in Egypt. What's the big picture? What's going on?
God's going to make them great kingdom out of them.
Right.
Is that the right expression?
Yeah, great kingdom. Yeah, great people, great nation. Yeah, God's going to, and had God promised to take care of Jacob and his family?
Yes.
Yeah. So God is keeping his promises here, and they're getting all of this land. Now God is working through people like Pharaoh. He's working through Joseph and others to, accomplish what he needs to accomplish. But the big picture is God is the one who's ultimately in control. Ultimately, he's the one who's bringing about all this good. So we got to remember God is keeping his promises, and he's providing for Jacob through his son Joseph. So very important stuff going on there. All right. So in verses 7 through 10, what's happening there? What's going on in those verses?
Jacob meets Pharaoh.
Yeah. Jacob comes down and meets Pharaoh. Yeah. And when he comes down and he meets Pharaoh, what does he do?
He said he blessed him.
Yeah. He blessed him. Is there anything significant about that? Anything significant?
Well, Pharaoh is the one that's better off, and Jacob is the one that's blessing Pharaoh.
Yeah. So what does that mean?
I don't know.
Good answer.
Yeah.
It kind of makes you wonder, though, then at that time, what Pharaoh maybe thinks about Joseph's God.
Right.
I mean, if Jacob's able to bless him, is Pharaoh receptive at that time, do you think?
Well, Pharaoh does not reject. Now, a blessing doesn't mean that Pharaoh knew anything about, the one true God, Yahweh, or that he worshiped him or anything like that. But Hebrews chapter 7 and verse 7, now it's speaking about Melchizedek and Abraham, but the truth is still relevant. It says in Hebrews 7:7 that the lesser person is blessed by the greater person. The lesser is always blessed by the greater. Now, when it comes to God blessing us, that is certainly not the case. But when it's talking about human interactions, the Hebrew writer says the lesser always is blessed by the greater. So here, it's clear that Jacob views himself as what compared to Pharaoh?
Greater.
He's greater. He's blessing him. Otherwise, he would be receiving a blessing from Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh would be the greater blessing the lesser. But that's not what happens. Jacob is greater than Pharaoh. Now, why would that be? Why would Jacob see himself as greater and bless Pharaoh? Pronounce a blessing upon him.
Well, he's talked to God in the past.
Okay.
God's told him he's going to do great things through him.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming he assumes that God's going to take care of him.
Yeah, God's going to take care of him. Yeah. I will note this as we're kind of talking about this. Jacob blesses Pharaoh twice, just so that's kind of in your minds. Jacob blesses him twice there. So Jacob recognizes that God has spoken with him. God is with him. That's true. Is it true that from an earthly perspective that Pharaoh is greater than Jacob? Thinking about it from an earthly point of view.
Earthly point of view, yes.
Yeah. I mean, Pharaoh is the ruler, right, of a whole nation, right? Jacob is, not to say that Jacob isn't wealthy and all of that kind of stuff. You know, Abraham was very wealthy. He would have had lots of, you know, servants and all that kind of stuff. But Jacob clearly does not have control over a whole nation of peoples and those kinds of things. He wouldn't have the same wealth and prestige and all of that as Pharaoh. But here's the thing, although Pharaoh is an earthly ruler, Jacob is the one through whom God is going to bring the King of Kings. See, the one who rules everything is going to come through Jacob. This is very similar to what the Hebrew writer says about Melchizedek receiving tithes through Abraham, right? The nation, the tribe of Levi paying tribute to Melchizedek. There's this interesting connection that goes on there. But here what's happening is the King of Kings. Jesus is the King of Kings. Is that right? King of Kings, Lord of Lords?
Yes.
Yeah. So through him, through Jacob, God is going to bring about the ruler of all rulers, the King of all kings. See, Jacob is special and Jacob is unique, regardless of what it looks like on the outside, regardless of what it looks like between Pharaoh and you know, if we were in the court of Pharaoh and we were asked, who do you think is greater? We would probably point to Pharaoh, right? Just looking outwardly. But Jacob is the one who is greater. And we see it here. I think we see it clearly because of the double blessing that happens. Now, he doesn't bless him just once, but he blesses him twice. And Pharaoh doesn't say anything about it. So Pharaoh seems to accept it for whatever reason. He's going to accept it. But here's the thing. We might think about it. Are Christians, think about this, are Christians sometimes poor? Are Christians sometimes without a lot of power, without a lot of popularity, prestige in the world's eyes? Do Christians sometimes look weak? Do they sometimes?
I'll answer your question. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we know of family members, right? Brothers and sisters in Christ in other countries, in our own country, but in other countries too, who live in little tin shed houses. I mean, they live in horrible circumstances. Christians in our own country, right? Brothers and sisters here. So, I mean, the answer to that is sure. Sometimes Christians are poor. Sometimes they're powerless. Sometimes they don't have prestige in the world's eyes. But what is the reality? What is the reality of who we are as Christians? What's the reality?
We're heirs to the kingdom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We are chosen of God in Christ. Ephesians 1, 4 through 8. 1 Peter 2, 9 through 10. We are children of God. John 1, 12. And 1 John 1, 12. 1 John 3, 1. We are heirs with Christ of everything, has been mentioned. That's Romans 8, 16 and 17. And we are a special people in God's eyes because of what Jesus has done. 2 Corinthians 5, 21. We are the righteousness. We are the righteousness of God in Christ because of what Jesus has done. So it might look, just like in this instance, it might look like we are weak or powerless. It might look like others have more power and power, but the reality is we are not. We are heirs. We are fellow heirs with Christ. We are heirs of all that he's an heir of. He's an heir of everything. We're co-heirs with him, fellow heirs. So we are the greater, if you want to look at it in that sense. We are the ones who inherit eternal life. We are the ones who have that relationship. We are the ones who are unique. Outwardly, doesn't always look that way, but the reality is bigger than the outward. And so we see that here with Jacob blessing Pharaoh. Sometimes things don't look, sometimes the reality is different than what it looks like. I'll give you another example. When Jesus was on the cross, what did it look like?
Look bad.
It looked really bad. It looked like all hell was laughing. It looked like he had
He
been
had lost.
defeated. Yeah. Listen, if you're a king and you're crucified, you're a loser. That's part of the problem with the gospel that Paul was preaching, because he was preaching a crucified Messiah. He was preaching a crucified king. Well, if your king gets crucified, it's a problem, right? He's a loser. It looked bad. Of course, we've got resurrection that goes on there, but it looked bad. But, Paul will say that in that very act, when it looked the worst, it looked so bad outwardly, Paul says that God was disarming the principalities, the powers. He was disarming all of them in the midst of what was going on there. It looked like the enemies were winning, but in reality, God was stripping them of their power in that act. So the point is, things don't always, the reality is not always what it looks like on the outside. Sometimes things look bad, but in reality, God is doing marvelous things. Sometimes it looks like Jacob is the lesser, yet the reality is he's greater than Pharaoh. Sometimes it looks like Christians are weak. Sometimes it looks like we're poor, and all of that. But the reality is we are heirs with God. So very important kind of
physically we may be.
Yeah, just like physically Jacob did not have the same things that Pharaoh had, yet he was greater.
Yep.
Absolutely. Things look like, they don't always look like the reality that they are. All right, let's look at verses, where are we here? Let's look at verses 13 through 28. 13 through 28. Hey, Angie, I see you on there. Can you hear us? You're muted. Unmute yourself. Touch the screen and look for the microphone. Unmute yourself. I'll send you that. See if you can unmute yourself. Well, we can't hear you, but wait a minute. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hey, there you are.
Hi.
Hey, good to see you.
Hi, Riley.
I'm glad you were able to make it on.
Thanks. Yeah, I couldn't figure it out for the longest time. I got it figured out now, I think.
Woo. Yeah, I think you got it. Hi.
Hi.
All right, so Genesis chapter 47. We'll look at 13 through 28. 13 to 28. Somebody want to read those verses? Anybody want to read 13 to 28?
I can do it.
Okay, go for it.
Now there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished by reason of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain that they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. And when the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all of the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone." And Joseph answered, "Give your livestock, and I will give you food in exchange for your livestock if your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the herds, and the donkeys. He supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. And when that year was ended, they came to him following year and said to him, "We will not hide from our Lord that our money is all spent. The herds of livestock are my Lord's. There is nothing left in the sight of my Lord but our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we and our land will be servants to Pharaoh, and give us seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for all the Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was severe on them. The land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he made servants of them from one end of Egypt to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priest had a fixed, there we go, had a fixed allowance for Pharaoh and lived on the allowance that Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, they did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, behold, I have this day bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Now here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. And at the harvest you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own, as seed for your own, as seed for the field, and as food for yourselves and your households, and as food for your little ones. And they said, you have saved our lives. May it please my Lord, we will be servants to Pharaoh. So Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, and it stands to this day that Pharaoh should have the fifth. The land of the priests alone did not become Pharaoh's. Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it, and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147. You want me to go on from there? Where do you want me to stop?
28.
28.
That's what you just
Okay, you're back up.
Yep, that's fine. You're right. You're right where you need to be. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so what are we told in this section? What's some information that we get right off the bat?
It just got worse and worse for the people. I mean, things went from bad to worse.
People were starving.
Yeah. People are starving. Right? The famine is severe. It's bad. Right? I mean, things are not going well. And so there's famine in the land. It's still severe. Things are still hard. Now, would that include Goshen, or is Goshen kind of taken out of the equation? Is everything a bed of roses for the people in Goshen?
I don't think so.
No, it's famine severe all over the place.
Famine's famine.
Yeah, and it says in verse 13 there, the end part, it says, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished by reason of the famine. I mean, this is everywhere. It doesn't say, oh, and the people of God were spared from this hardship. Do God's people ever go through hardship?
Yes.
Do they go through famines with everyone else?
Yes.
Do they go through plagues and viruses and all kinds of, do they go through troubles? Of course they do. Clearly they do. And it's the same in our day and age today. It's the same as it was back then. The reality is, just because God is with his people does not mean, and we've talked about this before, but it's always worth bringing up again. It doesn't mean that God's people will not go through hardships. I mean, could God have taken away the famine?
Yes.
Could he have taken away the famine just for the people of Israel in Goshen?
Well, he could have.
Of course he could have. He speaks and things come into existence. He can do whatever he wants. He didn't. Now we know that there's some things going on here, why he's allowing it. Clearly it's part of his plan, but he could have separated. In fact, what we will see if we continue reading in the book of Exodus is that there's a period of time when God brings the plagues upon Egypt, and there's no distinction between the Egyptians and God's people. But then God makes a distinction, and the plagues only affect the Egyptians. And then there's a distinction between people who will follow whatever God's word says and those who will not. So God can make a distinction. God could have done whatever he wanted. He didn't. Could God make every Christian immune to this virus that's going around today?
Yeah.
Well, he could.
He could. I mean, listen, it's not outside the realm of God's ability to do something like that. He doesn't. He didn't save Joseph and his family from the famine. What he did was he put Joseph in charge. He was able to move him through, again, all that happens. But Joseph is in charge of all the storehouses. God is taking care of the people of Israel, the nation, Jacob and Joseph and the family. But he's doing it by means of Joseph, by means of even bad things that happen. Remember, how did Joseph get to be second in command in Egypt?
Through hardships.
He went through all kinds of hardship, didn't he? He was sold into slavery. He was accused by a woman falsely. He was thrown into a pit, a dungeon, right? I mean, and this was for years. So God used all of that and brings Joseph out. And so the point is, God's people, listen, there's still famine in the land. Things are, even though there's been a great reunion, even though the people have Goshen, which is the best part of the land, there's still a famine. There's still hardships going on, and it affects everybody. That's the point of verse 13. Everybody is affected. Now, Joseph is providing. He's providing. Well, God, through Joseph, is providing for everybody, even in midst of this severe famine. Now, what do we see and what do we learn in regards to Joseph in this section here? What does this section kind of tell us about Joseph? We see him in action, don't we? What's he doing?
He's buying up everything for Pharaoh.
Absolutely. We would say that he's shrewd and he's an intelligent manager, right? He's able, he's capable, and he's doing what needs to be done in order to secure certain things. And he ends up purchasing everything, right? Not just the land. He ends up purchasing the people, the lives. He purchases everything for Pharaoh. So how does Pharaoh get rich and wealthy and prosperous?
He sells the things that Joseph stored up.
Yeah, Joseph stores everything up, and Joseph sells everything for Pharaoh, right? So Pharaoh receives all these blessings through Joseph. Joseph is the one who's doing all of this, and he is being blessed simply because God is with Joseph. And of course, God is taking care of Joseph's family. But there's spillover, we could say, into the lives of others. God's people, when they come in contact with other people, if those other people are not trying to attack them or something along those lines, will often receive benefits and blessings. Haven't we seen that in Joseph's life? Joseph goes into Potiphar's house. He blesses Potiphar, right? Potiphar is blessed. He goes into the prison is blessed, right? That things are prospering. He goes into working as second in command for Pharaoh. He's being, things are happening. Blessings are pouring over into pagan people's lives. That, Pharaoh is a pagan. He's worshiping multiple gods, right? And yet he's still receiving blessings. Same with Potiphar and all of that. This goes back to the promise that God had made to Abraham. Does anybody remember what one of the promises that God makes to Abraham that would be relevant that we're seeing working out here?
Through thee and thy seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed.
Well, that's true. That's true.
That's probably not the one you're thinking about.
Not the one I'm thinking of. That's going to happen. Sometimes it's hard to remember. Anybody remember?
I bet you do.
I better. I better for bringing it up, right? Remember, God says to Abraham, listen, whoever blesses you, I will bless. And whoever curses you, I will curse. God says, I'm going to be with you. Don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of you. And in fact, I'm going to bless people who are on your side. The friends, the people who are your friends, I'm going to be their friend. And we see this working out here. And again, we see it through the life of Joseph and others, the other patriarchs or whatever. There's overflow that spills into the lives of unbelievers, of pagans, of all. Do we see that happen today? Do we see this spillover of blessing into the lives of others who are not Christians, if they're in close contact with Christians?
Well, yes.
Sure we do. Sure we do. I'll give you an example, a biblical example. Paul will talk about a married couple, and one of them is a Christian and the other is not. And he talks about there being a blessing there, that there's a sanctification that happens there. It's not salvation, but there's a sanctification that happens there. And then he brings in the children. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, things of that nature. But there's blessing. There's often a blessing that happens when people are in contact with God's people and who are not trying to abuse God's people, right? I mean, if you try to abuse God's people, then you shouldn't expect a blessing. But often it flows over into the lives of others. And God uses that obviously to as a point of evangelism and other things, but we can see that kind of thing happening. God said to Abraham, I'm going to bless people who bless you. People who take care of you, who are good to you, I'm going to take care of them as well. And that's what's going on here. So Joseph is a great manager. He buys everything up. And this really sets the stage for the Exodus that's going to happen. And this tells us why. This is the background to the book of Exodus. Why it is, the pharaohs, why are they so powerful and all of that? And this tells us the background to what happened. It was through Joseph that this happens. All right, so let's look at how much time we got. Yeah, we got time. Let's look at verses 29 through 31. I'll read this because it's small and short. 29. And when the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, if now I've found favor in your sight, put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal kindly and truly with me. Do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. Carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. He answered, I will do as you have said. And he said, swear to me. And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed himself upon the head of his bed. All right. So these couple verses here, what's going on in this section? Pretty obvious. What's the first obvious thing that's going on?
He's about ready to die.
Yeah, he feels the end is coming. And what does he want?
Go home.
Yeah, he wants to be buried in his own land.
Yeah, he wants to go home. He wants to go home.
Yeah.
Now, some people may not care today, right? Some people may not care where they're buried. They die in a foreign land, they don't care. But a lot of people still want to go home, don't they? If they,
Yes.
In fact, I've known people, you've probably known people who maybe have been terminally ill, they've been really sick, and it's getting to the end, and they travel back home. They go home. They go back to where their people are. So part of this is just, there's something about comfort. But this also shows us something. It shows us that home is found not in Egypt, but it's found in Canaan, right? Now, why is it Canaan that is home for Jacob?
Well, that's where the ground was bought for a graveyard.
Yeah. I mean, that was home for a long time. Of course, he traveled. He went away from that land, but he comes back. But this is also the promised land, right? This is the land that God says to the descendants of Abraham, this is going to be your land. It's not theirs yet. It's theirs in promise. Now, there's a purchase of land, right? There's a burial grave. There's a cave, the cave of Machpelah, that is owned. And that's kind of like it's not really a down payment or a deposit, but it's kind of that idea of saying, we understand that this is ours, even though we don't have possession of it fully right at this point in time. And that's what the people of Israel, and Jacob will not own that land, all of Canaan land, but that's home. That's home for him, and it's part of that promised land. And of course, he feels passionate about being buried there because all of his relatives are buried there. But it's, again, connected to that covenant, the promises of God. And he feels deeply about this fact, doesn't he? I mean, he's really concerned about being buried in Canaan, isn't he?
Yes.
I mean, he actually has him lay his hand on his thigh. You remember that we've seen that before when people make pledges. Abraham has his servant put his hand under his thigh to go and find Isaac a wife. Everybody remember that story? He puts his hand on his thigh. Same thing happening here. It's almost like he doesn't want. It's so much. It's so important to Jacob that it's not good enough for him just to say, I'll do it. He says, you need to swear to me, right? Verse 31. Swear to me, right? Make this oath. It's almost a covenant. Make this covenant that I'm going to be out of here. Now, even in spite of the famine that's going on in Egypt, that everybody is, participating in, we could say, were things pretty good in Egypt for Jacob and his family?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, even in light of the, the hardships, they're still being taken care of. They might not have had as much, as they would have liked in times past, but they're being taken care of. Things are pretty good. They're eating, their livestock's okay. So things aren't too bad. So why doesn't he just put down roots and just think of this place as home? I mean, could that happen?
It could have, but that's not the promised land.
That's not the promised land. That's not the promised land, right? Regardless of how good it is, was the promised land physically better than Egypt at this time?
No.
No. Remember, everybody is going to Egypt to find food. Food's found in Egypt, right? They're in the best place they could be. And they're with the best person they could be with, right? The second in command, Joseph, right? So things are pretty good. And you could kind of see somebody getting comfortable. And whether they said it or not, they could kind of think, yeah, this is home now. This is home now. Here's a question. Do we often have good things and enjoyable times in this world today?
Sure.
Yeah, we do. I mean, nobody's life tends to be horrible all the time, right? Most of the time, there's at least some point that has some highlights to it at some point along the way. Now, do we sometimes feel like this world is my home? Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. Sometimes we do. Quite often we do. There's a song, everybody wants to go to heaven, nobody wants to die. There's another one that says something along the lines of, somebody said, come Lord Jesus, just not today. Like I've got Hawaiian vacation to go on, and heaven's clearly, right? Glory is clearly not going to be, the resurrection is clearly not going to be better than going to Hawaii. So, hey, come just after that, right?
I'm just passing through.
That's right. That's right. This world is not my home, just passing through. But sometimes we can get lulled into that, especially if things are going pretty well. Even in the midst of you know, coronavirus and, you know, social tensions and whatever, we can sometimes think it's not too bad. It's pretty good. And we can get very comfortable. That's the thing we have to fight against. That's the thing we have to remember. See, even though Jacob never left Egypt to go back to the promised land, Jacob never went to the promised land while he was living. He never went back there. He goes back, we'll find out. He goes back when he dies, right? He's buried there. He always stayed in Egypt for the rest of his life, this last portion of his life, but he never felt at home. He always wanted to go back home. There's something there about that. I think we can learn a lesson from that. We live in this world. We live in this system of things. You know, we're in it, but we should not be of it, right? This world should not be where we plant our roots. We should be thinking, I'm here for a while. I will do my best to honor God in everything that happens, but this is not the end point. This is not the resting place. We're headed on to the promised land. So important truths, I think, there. So we, like Jacob, can live here, but not get too comfortable, we might say. All right. Any last thoughts on this? I think we will leave. I think we'll leave it here because we'll be getting into a new chapter. Anything you want to bring up before we close it up tonight?